I was certain that nothing in this world could truly shake me anymore. After all I'd endured, after every storm life had hurled at me, I thought nothing could break me. I was wrong. I never imagined my life would become one of those stories you read about online, tales of betrayal, of families torn apart, of trust turned into a weapon. I was 62, a widow, still trying to survive the grief of losing my husband, Robert. 4 long months had passed since his death, and every morning I woke up in a house that felt too quiet, too empty without him. I thought I had seen it all. After decades as a school principal, after endless trials and losses, I believed nothing could break me anymore. But the truth is, life had one more cruel lesson waiting. It began with a phone call from a law office about Robert's estate, what I thought would be a mere formality. Instead, on my way to that meeting, a stranger stepped out of the shadows in the parking garage, his voice urgent, his eyes burning with warning. Don't sign anything. Your daughter-in-law is not who you think she is. In that instant, my blood froze. I didn't realize it yet, but I was about to step into a carefully prepared trap, but one that could have stripped me of everything. I chose my dark brown dress, the very one Robert always said brought out my eyes. He had bought it for me on our 37th wedding anniversary just 3 years ago. As I fastened the pearl necklace he had given me on our wedding day, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. The woman staring back at me seemed older, more fragile, a stranger shaped by grief. My name is Sophie, and I was an elementary school principal for 28 years before retiring 5 years ago. Robert worked as an insurance agent, an honest, reliable man who built trusting relationships with clients for decades. We have a son, Bradley, who is 35 years old. He's either an IT freelancer or a part-time contractor at an IT company. I don't really understand these things, but generally he does web design, and his income, well, let's just say it's unpredictable. Bradley has a wife, Rachel, who's a nurse, and they've been married for 7 years. When Rachel first entered our lives, I thought we were incredibly lucky. She seemed perfect, caring, attentive, always ready to help. Robert, my husband, and I welcomed her with open arms. Now, looking back, I realized that some things seemed too good to be true. But then I believed in the sincerity of her smile, in the warmth of her embrace. That Tuesday morning, preparing for the meeting with the lawyers, I had no idea how wrong I had been. The drive downtown took longer than expected. Traffic was heavier than usual, and I nervously drummed my fingers on the steering wheel. I wasn't sure why I felt so anxious. This was supposed to be a simple formality. Robert and I had discussed his will many times over the years. Everything was supposed to go to me, with provisions for Bradley and his family after my death. I drove into the underground parking garage beneath the law firm's building. My hands were slightly trembling as I turned off the engine. The concrete walls seemed cold and unwelcoming. I gathered my purse and the folder of documents they had asked me to bring, took a deep breath, and headed toward the elevator. That's when I heard someone's voice calling me. I turned around and saw a man approaching me. He was probably around 50, wearing neat, those simple clothes, a plaid shirt, worn jeans, clean sneakers. His dark hair with gray streaks was neatly combed, and he had the look of someone who takes care of himself. My first instinct was to keep walking, maybe even run. Robert had always warned me about being alone in underground parking garages. But something in his eyes stopped me. They weren't threatening or wild. They were worried, almost desperate. He stopped at a respectful distance and told me he needed to tell me something important. Then he asked if I was really Mrs. Carter, Robert's widow. My heart began to pound. How did this stranger know my name? Know about Robert? I told him I didn't know who he was and asked him to leave me alone, reaching for my phone. The man understood how this looked, but introduced himself as Marcus Thompson. He explained that he had worked as a court reporter for 9 years before retiring 2 years ago. After that, he occasionally took on private investigative work, which had drawn him into suspicious cases involving the same law firm. Marcus often worked with this law firm called Morrison and Garrison, recording their proceedings, and he still had contacts there. He had accidentally overheard conversations about my husband's will. I froze. As you understood, Morrison and Garrison was the law firm whose lawyers I was supposed to meet in 15 minutes. The man nervously looked around, as if checking that no one was watching us. He told me that my daughter-in-law Rachel had been in contact with certain people at this law firm, that there were documents she had prepared. My mouth went dry, and I asked what he was talking about. Marcus admitted that while he couldn't prove it yet, he thought Rachel was planning to alter my husband's will. She had been telling people that I wasn't capable of handling the inheritance. She had medical record statements from people claiming I was acting confused, forgetful. His words hit me like a blow. I grabbed the side of the car for support. This was impossible. I had never been diagnosed with anything. I was perfectly fine. Marcus said he knew this, which is why he was waiting here hoping to catch me before the meeting. Actually, Rachel wasn't expecting me to show up today. She had told the senior partner of the firm that I probably wouldn't even remember about the meeting. But this was important to me since it concerned the inheritance. My anger flared up, drowning out the fear. How dare she? How dare anyone question my mental state? The man nodded sympathetically and added something else. There was a high probability of document forgery, making it look like your husband wanted to change his will in the last months before his death. A high probability of falsification, fake medical reports claiming he was worried about your ability to manage finances. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Do you understand what you could be getting into? Marcus asked. I felt like I was drowning. None of this made sense. Robert had never expressed any concerns about how I managed money. On the contrary, I was the one who handled most of our finances throughout our marriage. I asked why he was telling me this. Studying his face for any signs of deception, Marcus explained that he knew my husband. They were both members of the Denver Entrepreneurs Business Club. Robert had always been an honest man, helped him with insurance consultations when he had problems, and because what Morrison and Garrison was doing was wrong, and that's why he, as a friend, was here now warning about the consequences. I looked at this stranger, this man who was risking his peace of mind to warn me. When I asked his name, he introduced himself again, Marcus Thompson. He was a court reporter. He recorded proceedings for various firms, including cases for the Morrison and Garrison law firm, but recently he had learned too much about their dark dealings. I asked what he meant by dark dealings. Marcus looked around again and lowered his voice almost to a whisper. He told me they worked with a black market for documents they forged, wills, medical reports, witness testimonies, all for money. It was a whole scheme. They took huge sums to make inconvenient heirs disappear from documents. And this wasn't for public disclosure. If the authorities found out about this, half of Denver's wealthy families would be under investigation. He had heard rumors that they discussed a sum. They were talking about an inheritance worth $2 million. And supposedly my daughter-in-law had paid them a lot for the service of changing the inheritance. The elevator arrived. Marcus warned me that I needed to be very careful up there. They expected me to just sign the papers without reading them carefully. He asked me not to let them pressure me into anything. Before I could ask more questions, he melted back into the shadows between the cars. I stood there for several minutes, my mind spinning from everything he had told me. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as the ravings of a troubled person, but something deep in my gut told me he was telling the truth. I thought about Rachel, my daughter-in-law. She had always been nice to me to my face, but I had noticed little things over the years. The way she whispered with Bradley when I entered the room. How she always seemed to steer conversations away from me during family gatherings. Subtle looks of irritation when I talked about Robert and our life together. With trembling hands, I pressed the elevator button. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Marcus watching me from behind a pillar, his expression full of concern. The ride to the 15th floor seemed like an eternity. When the doors opened, I entered the luxurious reception area of Morrison and Garrison. The mahogany furniture and expensive artwork that had once impressed me now seemed ominous, like a beautiful trap designed to lure unsuspecting victims. The receptionist, with a practiced smile, informed me that they were waiting for me in conference room A. As I walked down the corridor, my heels clicking on the polished marble floor, I noticed how quiet everything seemed. Too quiet. Most of the office doors were closed, and I could hear muffled conversations behind them. I stopped outside conference room A, my hand on the brass handle. Through the frosted glass, I could see several figures sitting around a large table. I immediately recognized one silhouette, Rachel's petite figure and distinctive hair. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. The room was exactly as I had expected, intimidating. 3 men in expensive suits sat on one side of the table with Rachel on the other side. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment I saw something flash across her face. The prize. There. It disappeared so quickly that I almost thought I had imagined it. Then she smiled, that same sweet smile she had been giving me for 7 years. Rachel told me she didn't think I would come today. The way she said it confirmed everything Marcus had told me. I greeted her, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Of course I'm here. This concerns my husband's inheritance. The lead attorney, a thin man with silver hair and cold eyes, gestured to an empty chair. He asked me to sit down and said they had some documents that required my signature today. As I sat down, I noticed Rachel nervously playing with her wedding ring, turning it around her finger again and again. She wouldn't look me directly in the eyes, instead focusing on the stack of papers in front of her. Before we began, I firmly placed my purse on the table and said I would like to understand exactly what we were discussing today. My husband and I had gone through his will many times. I was familiar with his wishes. The attorney quickly exchanged glances with his colleagues. Then the attorney told me there had been some recent developments. My husband had made certain amendments to his will in the last weeks, expressing concerns about. I interrupted him, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. What kind of concerns? Rachel finally looked at me, her eyes wide with what seemed like genuine worry. She told me that Robert had been worried about my health. He had mentioned several incidents when I seemed confused, forgetful. He wanted to make sure the inheritance was transferred properly. But where was Bradley in all this? My son should have been here, participating in these discussions about family finances. I asked where Bradley was. Shouldn't he be here for discussions about the family inheritance? Rachel quickly replied that he was on a business trip to San Francisco. He had an important client. He would fly back tomorrow, but the lawyers had a very tight schedule. Something about the way she said this made me doubt. Bradley never missed important family matters without a serious reason, and he would definitely have told me about a business trip. But I couldn't imagine what would happen next. One of the attorneys took out a thick folder and spread documents in front of me. I tried to focus on the papers, but the letters blurred before my eyes. After everything Marcus had told me, every word seemed suspicious. The lead attorney explained to me that according to the new will, the entire inheritance would be placed in a trust fund. Bradley was appointed as the fund manager, and I would receive monthly maintenance payments. The amount seemed ridiculously small for what Robert had accumulated over his lifetime. I asked what specific medical documents had served as the basis for such a decision. Rachel quickly intervened and said she had certificates from our family doctor. She claimed Dr. Wilson himself had confirmed that I showed signs of early onset dementia. But this was an obvious lie. I hadn't visited Dr. Wilson for over a year since he had moved to another state. He couldn't possibly have issued any new reports. The last time I saw him was at Robert's funeral, where he expressed his condolences to me. Getting answer after answer, I began to understand that my worst doubts were coming true, that Marcus was right. Rachel had indeed forged medical documents. I asked if I could see these certificates personally. The attorney said the documents were in another office, but assured me of their authenticity. Rachel nervously adjusted her hair and added that all procedures had been conducted in accordance with the law. She spoke to me in a tone as if I really was a sick old woman incapable of understanding what was happening. But my mind was working clearer than ever. I understood that I had fallen into a carefully planned trap. Every word, every document was part of a grand deception, and my own daughter-in-law was its chief architect. I decided to test their reaction and said I wanted to postpone signing until Bradley returned. As a mother, I had the right to discuss such important decisions with my son personally. The attorneys exchanged glances, and I saw panic in their eyes. One of them said that a delay could lead to additional legal complications. The IRS was already waiting for the documents, and any delay could result in penalties. Rachel supported them, adding that Bradley had already given his consent over the phone. But I knew my son. He would never make such decisions without talking to me first, especially decisions concerning declaring his own mother incompetent. I asked to call Bradley right now. Rachel fidgeted in her chair and said he was currently in an important presentation with a client. Time differences, meetings, inability to reach him, she had an answer for everything. But the more she explained, the more obvious her lies became. I took out my phone and said I would try to contact my son myself. Rachel sharply extended her hand as if wanting to stop me, but then quickly pulled it back and smiled unconvincingly. I dialed Bradley's number. The phone rang several times, then went to voicemail. This was strange. My son always answered my calls, especially during work hours. But as it turned out later, he was in a very important meeting and couldn't take the call. Rachel exhaled with relief and said that's what she had told me, he was unavailable. But something in her behavior made me suspicious. She was too prepared for Bradley not to answer. I decided to try a different approach. I told the attorneys I needed time to think. Such important financial decisions couldn't be made in a rush. I stood up, preparing to leave. The lead attorney stood up as well and said he understood my doubts. But then he said a phrase that made me go cold. He said that if I refused to sign the documents today, they would be forced to initiate proceedings to declare me incompetent through the court. They had enough medical evidence and testimony from close people. The process could drag on for months, cost a lot of money, and the result would be the same anyway. Only instead of voluntary consent to trust management, a judge would make the decision. This was open blackmail. Rachel looked at me with an expression of full sympathy. She said she didn't want me to go through the humiliation of a public court process. It would be better to resolve everything peacefully within the family circle. But I saw the truth in her eyes. She didn't care about my dignity or feelings. She just wanted to get the money as quickly and quietly as possible. I told them I needed to go to the bathroom to compose myself. Actually, I needed time to think and find a way to contact Marcus. He was the only one who could help me prove the truth. Rachel offered to accompany me, but I firmly refused. I hadn't yet lost the ability to get to the bathroom by myself. In the corridor, I quickly dialed the emergency services number. But then I stopped. What would I tell the police? That my daughter-in-law was trying to steal my inheritance with fake documents. I had no proof, only the words of a stranger from the underground parking garage. And they had a whole folder of officially prepared papers. Instead, I decided to try calling Bradley again. This time I used his company's work number. The secretary answered immediately and said that Mr. Carter was in the office. My heart began beating faster. Rachel had lied about the business trip to San Francisco. A minute later I heard my son's familiar voice. Bradley was surprised by my call and asked if everything was okay. I told him where I was and what was happening. His silence lasted so long that I thought the connection had been lost. Then he said words that turned my world upside down. He said he knew about the meeting. He knew about the documents. At first, he admitted he had gone along with the plan not because he thought I was incompetent, but because Rachel convinced him it was the best way to protect the inheritance from taxes. He hesitated, clearly torn, still wanting to believe her. But when I told him about the forged medical certificates and the threats of court proceedings, his voice changed. She had told him that I myself had asked her to organize everything because I didn't want to deal with financial matters after Father's death. Bradley believed her. He thought he was helping me, making my life easier. He said Rachel had told him something completely different. No mention of my incompetence or coercion. Everything was supposed to be a voluntary decision for my own convenience. I asked him to come to the Morrison and Garrison office immediately. I needed the support of the only person I could trust. Bradley said he was leaving right now, but he asked me not to sign anything until he arrived. When I returned to the conference room, Rachel looked at me carefully. She probably noticed changes in my behavior. I no longer looked like a confused old woman. I knew the truth, and that gave me strength. I told them I was ready to sign the documents. But first I wanted to read them carefully once more. The attorney readily pushed the papers toward me. While I pretended to study the terms, I thought about what I had learned. Rachel was even more cunning than I had supposed. She hadn't just forged documents. She had manipulated my own son, using his love for me against both of us. She had made him believe he was helping the family while she was actually destroying it. 20 minutes later, the conference room door burst open. Bradley entered, and his face expressed a mixture of anger and confusion. Rachel paled when she saw her husband. She began saying something about how glad she was to see him, but he raised his hand, stopping her. Bradley came to me and hugged me. Then he turned to the attorneys and said he wanted to see all documents concerning his mother's competency. All medical certificates, all witness testimony. The lead attorney tried to explain that this was just a formality, but Bradley insisted. He wanted to know the names of doctors, dates of examinations, details of every incident that allegedly confirmed my inability to manage finances. The attorneys began shuffling through papers, but I could see they were stalling for time. Rachel tried to take control of the situation. She told Bradley he had misunderstood the essence of the procedure. No one was declaring me incompetent. They were just creating a trust fund for my convenience. But Bradley already knew the truth. He asked her directly why had she told him that I myself had asked for this, if they were actually threatening me with court proceedings. Rachel opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. Finally, she said she was just trying to protect him from worries. She knew how difficult it would be for him to accept the fact of my deteriorating condition. But Bradley wasn't stupid. He looked at me, at how clearly and logically I answered questions, how calmly I analyzed the situation. No signs of dementia or confusion. His wife had lied to him. Then he demanded to see the certificate from Dr. Wilson. I told Bradley that Dr. Wilson had moved to Oregon over a year ago. The last time I saw him was at Father's funeral. The attorneys frantically flipped through documents. Cornered, one of the attorneys finally admitted that the certificate hadn't come from Dr. Wilson at all. It was issued under the name of another physician, Dr. Harris, from a downtown clinic I had never heard of. It was clear now, Dr. Wilson's name had been used as cover, while the actual paperwork came from a fraudulent source. But I had never heard of such a doctor or such a clinic. Bradley asked for the clinic's phone number to verify the information. The attorney said he couldn't provide personal medical data without appropriate permissions. But I said I gave my consent to verify any documents concerning my health. Then Rachel stood up and headed for the door. She said she felt sick and needed to get some fresh air. But Bradley blocked her path. He said she wasn't going anywhere until she explained what was happening. Rachel began to cry, first quietly, then louder and louder. She talked about how hard it had been for her to watch my condition, how she feared I would get lost or harm myself, how she wanted to protect me from my own mistakes. But her tears didn't work. Bradley could see that I was perfectly oriented in the situation, that my memory and logic worked flawlessly, that the only one behaving inadequately in this room was his wife. The attorneys also realized the situation was getting out of control. The lead attorney said that perhaps they should postpone the meeting, give everyone a chance to cool down and think about the situation. But I said I wanted to sort everything out right now. It was time to hear the truth. Then Bradley did something I didn't expect from him. He took out his phone and called the police. Rachel screamed, begging him not to do this. She said everything could be resolved within the family, that there was no need to air dirty laundry. But it was too late. Bradley explained to the dispatcher that he suspected document fraud, possible forgery of medical certificates, and attempted illegal seizure of inheritance. The attorneys began collecting papers, clearly intending to leave the office. But Bradley asked them to stay. The police would want to talk to all participants. Rachel collapsed into a chair and covered her face with her hands. Her beautiful scheme was crumbling before her eyes. You can't even imagine that the most unexpected was still ahead. A few minutes later, a familiar person entered the conference room. It was Marcus. But now he looked completely different. He wore a strict suit, and he had a folder of documents with him. Rachel looked at him and turned even paler. Marcus introduced himself to the attorneys as a private detective. He said that for the past 2 months he had been gathering evidence of Morrison and Garrison's fraudulent scheme. Recordings of phone conversations between Rachel and the attorneys, financial documents showing how much she had paid for forging papers, and most importantly Robert's original will, the very one she had tried to replace. I realized that the meeting in the underground parking garage hadn't been a coincidence. Marcus was indeed working on this case, and I wasn't the only victim of this scheme. Morrison and Garrison had deceived dozens of families, stolen millions of dollars from elderly people. And here is the horror, Rachel was one of their most active accomplices. She had specifically married my son Bradley. She had waited for his father's death, but this dragged on for many years, which wasn't part of her plans. But eventually she began implementing the plan to seize the inheritance. Coldly, calculatingly, without a drop of regret about destroying the family that had accepted her as their own. When the police arrived, Rachel tried to lie one last time. She said she had acted with the best intentions, that she just wanted to help the family. But Marcus's evidence was irrefutable. The attorneys were arrested right in the office. Rachel was taken away after them. Before they put her in the police car, she looked at me. There was no longer any fake kindness in her eyes, only cold anger and hatred. Anger that her plan had failed. Hatred that I had turned out to be stronger than she thought. Bradley stood next to me, holding my hand. My son was crying, not from joy, but from grief. Grief from realizing that the woman he had loved had never loved him. That their 7 years of marriage had been a lie. That she had used his feelings to achieve her goals. Marcus approached us and apologized for the deception. He explained that he couldn't reveal the whole truth to me at once. Too much depended on how I would behave at the meeting. If I had known he was a detective, my reaction might have seemed unnatural. And Rachel and the attorneys were very observant. Any false note could have destroyed the entire case. I thanked him for everything. Without his warning, I would have signed the documents. And then proving the fraud would have been much more difficult. Now we had all the trump cards. Robert's real will, evidence of forgery, records of the criminal's negotiations. Justice had prevailed, but the price of this victory was very high. It was an unbearably high price for victory. The family I had considered strong and loving turned out to be built on lies. The woman I had called daughter had betrayed us for money, and my son had lost not only his wife, but also faith in the sincerity of human feelings. When we left the law firm building, I thought about how quickly life can change. In the morning, I was a lonely widow trying to cope with inheritance formalities, and by evening I had become the victim of a complex criminal scheme that had nearly deprived me of everything. But I also realized something important. I was stronger than I had thought. My mind was clear. My will was unshakable. And I wouldn't let anyone use me or my loved ones again. Rachel thought she could easily deceive an elderly woman, but she miscalculated. Age hadn't made me weak or naive. On the contrary, it had given me wisdom and experience that helped me see the truth through her lies. Now there would be months of court proceedings ahead. Interrogations, witness testimony, document examinations. But I was ready to go through all of this. For justice. For Robert's memory. And so that other families wouldn't become victims of such fraudsters. Rachel's story was over. But my story was far from over. The story of a woman who refused to be broken. Who fought and won. Who proved that age isn't a sentence, but an advantage. That's the end of today's story. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so share them in the comments below. I truly enjoy reading what you have to say. If you'd like more, check out the playlist linked in the description. New real stories are on the way, and I'd love to share them with you. Hopefully, I'll see you next time. If this journey resonated with you, please hit subscribe and tap the bell so you'll never miss the latest stories. Thank you for listening, and remember, even the darkest betrayals can end with truth and dignity.